The Catcher in the Rye.
The setting is important in a good novel because it gives readers a visual aspect and helps readers imagine where and what the reader is going, creating a more enjoyable book to read. As the readers get deeper into the novel, they experience the many setting changes. For example, Holden explains where he usually used to hang out on late nights in the city. In case you don't live in New York, the Wicker Bar is in the sort of swanky hotel, the Seton Hotel. I used to go there quite a lot, but I don't anymore. Salinger 157. Salinger also gives out small details of small parts of the story, making more visual preference for the readers. Anyway, these two nuns were sitting next to me, and we sort of struck up a conversation. The one right next to me had one of the straw baskets that you see nuns and Salvation Army babes collecting dough with around Christmas time. You see them standing on corners, especially on Fifth Avenue, in front of big department stores and all. Salinger 122. Another example would be how Holden talks about New York and Central Park. I lived in New York all my life, and I know Central Park like the back of my hand because I used to roller skate there all the time and ride my bike when I was a kid. But I had the most horrific trouble finding that lagoon that night. Salinger 170. Having interesting settings makes the readers want to read more of the book. In Catcher in the Rye, there is always a series of surprise of different settings as the readers read more of the novel. This is what makes the novel so much more interesting.
Characters and their evolution. Holden, main character of Catcher in the Rye, tries to protect himself from the pain and disappointment of the adulthood. He mentions this quote that signifies his protection towards his little sister Phoebe. Allie, Holden's little brother that passed away from leukemia. The meaning of the quote is to demonstrate Holden's appreciation towards his little brother Allie, who was a very intelligent and kind-hearted person. Jane, the girl Holden met at one summer. The quote demonstrates Holden's respect and interest of Jane, who he got to know very well. Phoebe, Holden's little sister that he enjoys talking to. The quote shows their close connection that they have towards each other, and that she brings true happiness to Holden's life. Stradlater, who is Holden's roommate. The quote explains how Holden describes him as a very handsome guy who is physically active and experienced.
Furthermore, The Catcher in the Rye goes in depth on the internal and external conflicts a teen boy endures. It assesses person versus society and person versus self. Holden Caulfield fights a battle with himself as he faces oppression caused by childhood trauma. Surely, losing a loved one can leave a dent in one's life, an empty place in their heart. This topic was studied in, I was only 13, and they were going to have me psychoanalyze and all, because I broke all the windows in the garage. You didn't know Allie. Salinger 50. This portrays one of the ways humans react to such an impact in their lives. It accurately depicts what one deals with and feels like when under that life-changing circumstance. He went through such a drastic event at such a young age, leaving his happiness to succumb. Salinger writes the characters realistically, giving readers an opportunity to see themselves in place of the main character. Moreover, the internal conflict of fighting to keep his innocence has caused the external conflict of not properly connecting with others. Caulfield continues to hate the world and the way people influence each other. The burden the presence of others place on him is shown in, It made me mad. People are always ruining things for you. Salinger 114. This encaptures the rage and anger that another person can cause someone to feel. Overall, Holden feels like he must protect children's innocence, since he thinks adults and phonies corrupt children and ruin their childhoods. Ultimately speaking, he despises the way adults infiltrate the purity of a child.
Holden is the prototypical adolescent struggling with growing up. He clumsily plods along the narrative, tripping on his traumatic experiences and landing face first into his misguided conclusions. He is hopelessly lost, yet becomes the oracle and guiding light as he emerges from the swamp of despair and is renewed. In the masterwork novel The Catcher in the Rye, J.D. Salinger uses the plot to describe Holden's growth and development, which will make clear people's commonality regarding struggles with alienation, hopelessness, anger, and loss. This provides inspiration for others to become his companions on the road to adulthood. In Salinger's plot, Holden is demoralized and depressed due to the death of his younger brother Ali. This leads to alienation, loneliness, anger, and confusion. First, he breaks windows in his garage. His grades suffer and he eventually gets expelled from school. He gets into random altercations and clumsily decides to escape his pain by running away and escaping all the phonies. He bums around New York City searching and yearning for human contact, concurrently rejecting it unless it leads to self-destruction and physical pain. He hires Sunny, but doesn't plan on doing anything with her. Instead, he is beaten up by Maurice. He contemplates suicide, but creates elaborate fantasies that prevent it. Holden says, "What I really felt like, though, was committing suicide. I felt like jumping out the window. I probably would have done it too, if I would have been sure somebody'd cover me up as soon as I landed. I didn't want a bunch of looking at me when I was all gory." Page 116 to 117. He gets beaten up, drunk, nearly molested, rejected, and bounces from one negative encounter to another until he has more or less a break from reality where he feels intermittently invisible. Holden is relatable to others because he is so helpless and hopeless. He is lost and confused and is blinded by his emotional pain. This leads him to seek out danger and self-harm. He represents teenagers in the most vulnerable and unprotected states. He illustrates in great detail how the death of a loved one permeates an entire existence and forces people to question it. Holden shows readers what is normal to feel and experience when faced with this. After a long and convoluted journey culminating with the decision to run away and become a recluse in the West, Holden decides to say farewell to his sister Phoebe. During that encounter, he has the epiphany that he needs to stay and become the catcher in the rye by protecting children, first and foremost his sister. Holden admits, "About all I know is, I sort of miss everybody I told about," page 234. When he recognizes his calling and embraces his role in real time with his own family, he is finally overwhelmed with happiness. Holden shows how to get out of a deep existential crisis, despite the difficulty of the path and the pain that is inevitably felt along the way. Here he offers people yet another roadmap to maturity.
To point out, one of the major themes of this novel is the main character, Holden, latching onto his innocence. He always valued others' chastity because what he had already diminished to the cruel world. This notion can be exhibited through God. I love it when a kid's nice and polite when you tighten their skate for them or something. Most kids are. They really are. Salinger 155. Therefore, the way he appreciates and savors that childlike state is one that not many books can interpret as well as Salinger did. Continuing, the author considers these themes with the use of pathos. This appeal to emotion Caulfield demonstrates attaches the reader to the story. The audience puts themselves in Caulfield's perspective, following when he loses himself to society's harsh pressure throughout the novel. These adult norms are being pressed down on him, causing him to mature too quickly. This can be showcased in, "What I have to do, I have to catch everybody if they start to go over the cliff. I mean, if they're running and they don't know where they're going, I have to come out from somewhere and catch them." Salinger 224 to 225. For this reason, readers can connect with Holden and his ideology behind the very thing that lingers in a child's mind for a little while. Innocence can only be protected for so long, and eventually, reality catches up. In addition, another interesting theme expressed in the novel was the phoniness of the world and how people put up facades to live their lives. This means that people focus entirely on others, that they fail to realize, like Holden, that they are phonies themselves. Salinger covers this concept in "I'm always saying, glad to have met you, to somebody I'm not at all glad I met. If you want to stay alive, you have to say that stuff though." Salinger 114. Again, this character is one to be hypocritical, pointing out things in others he fails to make out of himself. Many today are too busy following up on what others do and how they act, whilst unrecognizing themselves due to how much they've dissociated from life. Failing to understand his character, Caulfield generates hatred for others for living their lives the way they do. While always acknowledging the faults in others, he continues to act the way he claims he's against. This is implied in God. I hate that. I don't see why they can't talk in their natural voice. They sound so phony when they talk. Salinger 131. People are always quick to point out what others are doing wrong, and they do not realize that they are in the wrong themselves. Like Caulfield said, it's things like faking it and lying that may be the thing that keeps one alive.
The style of a book plays an important part in what draws in curious readers and convinces them to read the book. It is essential to create an engaging book. Salinger's The Catcher in the Rye is able to focus and perfect the style of this book, fixating on the narrative style. The narrative style of this book is in first person. This is demonstrated in I Wasn't Too Crazy About Her, but I'd known her for years, Salinger 117. Essentially, the style helps the readers understand the character as well as their thought process. The character is displayed as more humane rather than simply being a character in a novel. Salinger also decided to incorporate informal diction in his writing style. An informal diction causes characters to be easier to understand. The use of informality is in You're a dirty ... of a ... Salinger 50. Thus, the outcome of the usage of informal diction humanizes the book and shows readers that books do not always have to stick to a formal diction. Throughout the book, there is a consistent naturalness between characters and their actions. To create a truly interesting book that hooks readers from the very beginning, Salinger decided to relate his main character to how the majority of teenagers feel and act. Holden constantly expresses how he truly feels about himself and his actions. In the book, it states, I felt so lonesome. All of a sudden, I almost wished I was dead. Salinger 54. As most of the readers of this book are teenagers, the book will seem relatable to the readers. Salinger is also able to target Holden's actions at a certain audience that would understand how he feels. A well-employed style creates a good book and an enjoyable book.
Is The Catcher in the Rye worth the read? We believe that this novel is worth the read. With the intricacy of the characters and how they play in a teenager's confusing life, this story reels the audience in. The reader reflects the book's events through real-life occurrences. Following along on the journey of hatred, fear, guilt, and alienation, reality comes along to sculpt the path which the story will stay true to. This novel makes the reader think about how they can relate to the characters and the overall storyline.